Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the next module in our class. So this week you have two readings to look at. Both of them are relatively short. The first one is actually very short. The second one is pretty short. So the first one is by Reimarus. It's called The Third Fragment Passage of the Israelites Through the Red Sea. So Reimarus is was born, you can see, in 1694 and 1768. So I want to say a few things about who he is and then what his reading is about, so you can kind of get a handle on what you're looking at when you see it, because it's kind of old, right? Since he wrote it in the early 1700s, it'll have a sort of style to it that's less familiar to you. So here's what I want to tell you about Reimarus. First of all, this piece of reading you're going to read right now is an example of higher criticism. We talked about that in the last video, and you read about that in Armstrong's essay. So I'll leave you to that to look at your notes about what that means and how this is an example of higher criticism. Second, Reimarus was a pastor at his time. So as you read this, keep in mind that he took his belief in Jesus Christ and the Bible very seriously. Now, the word seriously is important here. When you take something seriously, you really take it seriously. Like, you get really into it. You don't just sort of say, yeah, I believe in God, blah, blah, blah. No, you actually take it seriously. Like, it's the most important thing, right? So he's a pastor who took his belief seriously. So as you read this, keep in mind that's what he's doing. That's where his attitude is, all right? So what he does, he looks closely, the way a critic would. Like, I think of a movie critic, looks really closely to how a movie is made and works, to both tell you, like, if he likes it or he doesn't like it, right, he or she. So he looks like a critic would at the story of the parting of the Red Sea. So I think many of you are probably already familiar with that. If you're not, just Google it. What is the story of the parting of the Red Sea? All right. So he looks very closely at that story, like really minutely at every line and how it works, right? So the questions you have to keep in mind as you read Reimarus, which is, again, a few paragraphs, is one, what is his attitude toward the miracle of God parting the Red Sea? Remember, he's got a critical attitude. But does he have an attitude about the miracle of God parting the Red Sea? Does he doubt it at all? Okay, so keep in mind, does he believe in the miracle of God parting the Red Sea? Do you see anywhere where he does not? All right, so keep that in mind. What is his attitude? Second, what exactly is the problem he's concerned about? I can't stress this enough. All writing generally deals with a problem. And certainly all the writing you're going to look at in college deals with a problem. So what's the problem that he thinks needs to be addressed? Exactly, right? And why does he think that's a problem? You should really get a handle on that by the time you're done reading Reimarus, okay? All right. Another question, this goes back to Armstrong. As I told you, we'd see Armstrong again and again. Is Reimarus concerned about myths? Even if he doesn't use that word. He may not even use that word. But given what you know about Armstrong's argument about myths and common ideas about myths, is Reimarus concerned about myths? And if so, how? In what way is he concerned about myths? All right. So for Reimarus, that's what you have to worry about. All right. That's what you have to deal with. So the second reading in this module is by Simon Blackburn. It's called The Death of God. Very provocative title, right? It's the kind of title that people bristle at. You know, oh, what do you mean God's dead, right? So Simon Blackburn's very old now, but he's alive. He's a philosopher, British philosopher. And he makes an interesting argument about ethics. So as you read Blackburn, there's a few things you got to keep in mind that people seem to get confused about. All right. First of all, start with this first sentence. This is the very first sentence of the reading. For many people, ethics is not only tied up with religion, it is completely settled by it. What does it mean to say that? By the way, just the word to settle something, when you settle an argument, it means the argument's over, right? Like, no one really argues anymore if the sun goes around the earth. Everybody knows the earth goes around the sun. No one's arguing that anymore. That argument is settled, right? All right, settled. Nobody cares. If somebody tries to make the case, we just laugh at them, right? So for many people, ethics, it's morality, ethics, I mean the same thing, is not only tied to religion, it's completely settled by it. In other words, if you want to know what's right and wrong, religion tells you what's right and wrong. If you're not sure, look at religion, okay? So what does he mean by that whole first paragraph, right? And how is the first sentence related then to the title, The Death of God, okay? You should be able to answer that question by the end of this reading. Okay, number 2. What is an agony aunt? You might want to look this up, right? What is an agony aunt and who is writing the letters to Dr. Laura? Many times when I've taught this class, students have confused and thought that Blackburn was the letter writer to Dr. Laura. He is not. He's imagining someone writing the letters to Dr. Laura, just like he's imagining Dr. Laura. So he's just imagining it. It's called a hypothetical example, right? So you should learn what an agony aunt is so you can figure out what this whole Dr. Laura letters are about, all right? Make sure you understand that. And then, of course, understand what's the point of the letters, right? Okay, something else he talks about is characters named Socrates and Euthyphro. As you might remember from my quick lecture on the history of the West, Socrates was like our first really famous philosopher of the ancient Greeks, all right? And Euthyphro was someone he talked to. It's like a play. And he talked to him about the meaning of morality, right? And he ends up in this place. So like, you got to ask yourself, what's the problem for this story, right? So he ends up in this place asking the following question. Is something holy because God loves it? Or does God love it because it's holy? What's the difference between those two questions? A lot of times people think they mean the same thing, and they do not. And secondly, people often say, well, it's something about the chicken and the egg. It's not that either. So neither of those are going to work. There's something very different about the two questions. So is something holy because God loves it? Meaning, if God said, I love this pen, does that make the pen holy? Or does God love things because there's something holy in the thing? This is very important, that difference. And when you read Blackburn, you're going to have to ask yourself, well, why does the difference matter? What is it that Blackburn is doing by bringing Socrates and Euthyphro into his essay? He's trying to make a point. What's his point? Why bother with that? Okay? His point's made as you get towards the end of the essay, but understand how he's doing that. All right? This is my last page of the slides. The next thing you want to ask yourself is, how does Blackburn use and talk about myth? Okay, again, you see this idea of myth. How does Blackburn, the word myth actually shows up in the piece. How does Blackburn use and talk about myth? And how does the way he talks about myth compare to how Armstrong talks about mythos, her idea of mythos? You should have a clear answer to that question when you read this piece, even when you read it a second time, right? So then finally, the question you want to make sure you have an answer to is, from Blackburn, where do ethics come from? Again, I want to say, ethics and morals basically mean the same thing. Ethics comes from Greek. Morals comes from Roman Latin. They're just two different words for the same thing. So where do ethics or morals come from? According to Blackburn, not according to you or your mom or your priest or your pastor. From Blackburn, where do ethics come from? And why does he think this? Why does he think that? On what basis does he make that? And now that you answer these questions, you might go back and say to yourself, why is it called the death of God? Okay? So read them, enjoy them, totally interesting pieces of writing, and enjoy the process of writing about them and getting into discussion forums. All right. Thank you very much.